In the dusty town of Copper Ridge, Texas, Clara Dawson had learned to make herself invisible. For 28 years she'd endured the whispers, the sideways glances, the cruel laughter that followed her through the general store. The rancher's daughter, who was too heavy, too plain, too unworthy of love. She'd built walls around her heart, brick by painful brick, until the day Jack Reddington rode back into town. The wealthy cowboy with ice in his veins and blood on his hands. The man everyone feared. The man who saw her. But why would the most dangerous man in 3 counties choose her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Clara Dawson pushed open the kitchen door of the ranch house, letting it swing shut behind her with a familiar creak. The air carried that particular coolness that came just before true spring arrived in Texas, when the earth still remembered winter, but the promise of warmth hung just out of reach. She carried her mother's old recipe box under one arm, its weathered wooden surface smooth from years of handling, the brass latch tarnished but still functional. Inside, tucked between cards for buttermilk biscuits and Sunday pot roast, were the handwritten recipes that had fed 3 generations of Dawsons. Her mother's careful script, her grandmother's spidery letters, even a few cards in her great-grandmother's hand. The ink faded to brown. Clara had started adding her own recipes 5 years ago, after her mother passed. It felt like keeping a conversation going, even though the other voice had gone silent. She set the box on the kitchen table and moved through the morning routine that had become as natural as breathing. Coffee first, the percolator bubbling on the stove while she mixed biscuit dough. Her hands worked without thought, cutting butter into flour, adding buttermilk until the consistency felt right. Not too wet, not too dry. You learned these things by feel, not measurement. Through the window above the sink, she could see her father already out by the barn, his tall frame slightly stooped, now at 63. Samuel Dawson had always been a man of few words, but his silence had deepened after his wife died. He spoke through action now. A hand on Clara's shoulder, an extra log on the fire when she worked late over the ranch books. The way he left wildflowers on the kitchen table every Sunday, picked from the meadow where he'd proposed to her mother 40 years ago. The biscuits went into the oven. Clara cracked eggs into the cast-iron skillet, watched them sizzle in the bacon grease. The kitchen filled with the smells of home, of continuity, of the small comforts that made a life worth living, even when that life felt small. She'd been up since 4:30. As always, fed the chickens, collected eggs, checked on the horses. Dancer, her sorrel mare, had nickered softly when Clara approached her stall, nuzzling her palm in search of the apple slice she always carried. The other horses, 3 geldings and 2 more mares, had been equally expectant. Animals knew routine. They found comfort in it. People in Copper Ridge knew routine too, and Clara Dawson's routine had been the same for 28 years. The capable daughter, the dutiful child who stayed home when other girls married and moved away, the woman who could birth a calf, mend a fence, and balance account books, but who nobody quite saw as a woman at all. She'd learned early that her body was the wrong shape for love. She'd been a chubby child, round-faced and soft where other girls grew angular and slim. Her mother had tried to comfort her. Beauty comes in all shapes, Clara Bear. The right man will see you clear. But the right man had never appeared, and after a while, Clara stopped looking. By 14, she'd endured enough snickering behind hands at church socials. By 18, enough pitying looks from girls who'd been her classmates. By 21, when Annie Mercer's wedding invitation arrived, thin and crisp and expensive, she'd stopped attending town functions altogether, unless absolutely Odysseus. The ranch became her world. The land didn't judge, the horses didn't whisper. Her father loved her unconditionally, and that had to be enough. The biscuits came out golden. She plated breakfast and carried it outside to where her father sat on the porch rail, his coffee cup steaming in his weathered hands. He nodded his thanks, and they ate in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher, turning the distant hills from purple to gold. "North fence needs mending," Samuel said finally, sopping up egg yolk with a piece of biscuit. "Saw it yesterday evening. I'll ride out after I finish the books," Clara replied. She had 3 hours of ledger work ahead of her, trying to make numbers stretch further than they wanted to go. The bank statement sat on top of the ledger like an accusation. Clara had been staring at it for the better part of an hour, trying to find money that simply wasn't there. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and they were short. Again, the third time this year, and it was only April. Her father didn't know how bad things had gotten. She'd been shielding him from the worst of it, handling correspondence with the bank, stretching their credit at the feed store, selling off parcels of cattle they couldn't afford to keep anyway. The drought last summer had devastated their hay crop. The winter had been brutal, killing off 3 calves and leaving the herd weakened. Now spring was here, but recovery took time and money they didn't have. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, feeling the headache that lived there most days now. The Dawson ranch had been in the family for 67 years. Her grandfather had built the original cabin with his own hands, expanded it over decades into the solid ranch house that stood today. Her father had been born in the bedroom upstairs. Her mother had died in it. The thought of losing this place felt like losing her mother all over again. Every room held memories. The kitchen where they'd canned peaches together. The porch where her mother had taught her to shell peas. The barn where she'd learned to ride, her mother's voice calling encouragement as Clara circled the paddock on an ancient pony named Rusty. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Through the window she saw Martha Hayes standing on the porch, a covered basket in her hand. Martha ran the general store in town, a widow of 15 years who'd never remarried. She was one of the few people in Copper Ridge who still treated Clara with genuine kindness. Clara opened the door, managing a smile. "Martha, what brings you out this way?" "Made extra preserves," Martha said, offering the basket. "Thought you and your father might enjoy them. That apricot kind your mama always loved." They both knew it was an excuse. Martha came by every few weeks, always with some offering, always with that same gentle concern in her eye. Clara invited her in, put coffee on, and they sat at the kitchen table like they'd done dozens of times before. "How are you managing, dear?" Martha asked, stirring sugar into her cup. "We're doing fine," Clara lied automatically. Martha gave her a look that said she knew better, but wouldn't push. Instead, she shifted topics. "Heard Jack Reddington's back in town. Saw him at the store yesterday, buying supplies." Clara's hand stilled on her coffee cup. She'd heard the name before, of course. Everyone in 3 counties knew about Jack Reddington, the wealthy cowboy who'd inherited the massive Reddington estate 5 years ago and promptly disappeared. Some said he'd been in the war, others claimed he'd been in prison. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing: Jack Reddington was dangerous. "Didn't know he'd left," Clara said carefully. "Been gone near 18 months this time," Martha replied. "Place has been standing empty, except for old Henry looking after it. But Jack's back now, and people are talking. People are always talking." "True enough." Martha sipped her coffee. "But I'll tell you something, Clara. I watched him in my store, and I didn't see a dangerous man. I saw a tired one, a lonely one. Makes you wonder what's true and what's just fear talking." Clara thought about that after Martha left. She returned to the ledgers, but her concentration had fractured. The numbers blurred together. Finally, she gave up and decided to ride out to the north fence. Physical work always helped clear her mind. Dancer seemed happy to be saddled, dancing sideways in anticipation as Clara led her from the barn. The mare was 8 years old, the best horse Clara had ever owned, with an intelligent eye and a gentle disposition. They'd been together 6 years, and Clara trusted her completely. The ride to the north fence took 40 minutes across open rangeland. The grass was coming back green after the winter, dotted with wildflowers. Bluebonnets would be blooming soon, painting the meadows in waves of purple. It was Clara's favorite time of year, when the land remembered how to be beautiful. She found the broken fence right where her father had said it would be. 3 posts leaning at odd angles, wire sagging between them. Likely a deer had crashed through during the night, spooked by something. It happened often enough out here where the ranch land bordered the wild country to the north. Clara dismounted and tied Dancer to a sturdy post, then assessed the damage. She'd need to reset 2 of the posts completely and restring the one. She had tools in her saddlebag, always did when riding the property. Growing up on a ranch taught you to be prepared. The work took concentration, digging out the old posts, setting new ones deep enough to hold, tamping the earth down firm. Her shoulders burned with the effort, but it was a good burn. Honest work that produced visible results. Not like staring at numbers that refused to add up no matter how many times you calculated them. She was stretching new wire between posts when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her first thought was her father, come to check on her progress. But when she looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, she saw an unfamiliar horse and rider cresting the rise to the east. The man sat tall in the saddle, his silhouette dark against the bright sky. As he drew closer, Clara could make out more details. A black horse, well-bred and powerful, a rider who moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime on horseback. He wore a dark coat, despite the warming day, his hat pulled low. He stopped about 20 feet away, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. She'd never seen Jack Reddington up close before. He'd been gone by the time she might have encountered him in town, and before that he'd been just another name she heard in passing. But there was no mistaking him now. He was perhaps 35, with a face that looked carved from stone. Hard jaw, straight nose, eyes so dark they seemed black from this distance. A scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, pale against sun-weathered skin. He hadn't shaved in a few days, dark stubble shadowing his face. Everything about him spoke of controlled power, of a man who'd seen violence and survived it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and rough, like gravel sliding over stone. "Didn't mean to startle you. Saw you working and wanted to make sure you weren't in trouble." Clara became acutely aware of how she must look. Dirt on her hands and probably her face, hair coming loose from its braid, her worn work shirt stretched tight across her body. She fought the urge to cross her arms over her chest, to make herself smaller. Instead, she lifted her chin. "Just mending fence," she said. "But I appreciate your concern." He nodded slowly, his gaze moving from her to the fence and back again. And that's when Clara noticed something that made her heart skip. He wasn't looking at her the way men in town looked at her, with that quick dismissive glance that said she wasn't worth noticing. He was actually looking at her, seeing her. "You're from the Dawson place," he said. It wasn't a question. "Clara Dawson. My father owns the ranch to the south, Jack Reddington." He touched the brim of his hat. "My land borders yours to the north." An awkward silence settled between them. Clara gripped the fence wire tighter, unsure what to say. This was the man people feared, the man with blood on his hands, if you believed the stories. But standing here in the open sunlight, he just seemed like a man, a lonely man, like Martha had said. "Your fence work looks solid," Jack said finally. "Not many people know how to set posts properly anymore. My father taught me, said if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right." Smart man. Jack's horse shifted beneath him, and he steadied it with an almost absent touch. "I should let you get back to it. Just wanted to make sure you were all right out here." He turned his horse to leave, and Clara surprised herself by speaking, "Thank you for checking." Jack looked back at her, and for just a moment, something flickered in those dark eyes. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than the stone-faced expression he'd worn before. "Ma'am," he said again, and then he was riding away, back toward the distant outline of the Reddington estate. Clara stood rooted to the spot long after Jack Reddington disappeared over the rise. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to the fence work, and she couldn't quite explain why. It wasn't fear. She'd felt no threat from him despite his reputation. It was something else entirely. The strange sensation of being seen as a person rather than a problem, or a punchline. She finished the fence as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. By the time she rode back to the ranch house, shadows stretched long across the land. Her father was in the barn, forking hay into the stalls, and she helped him finish the evening chores in their usual comfortable silence. Over supper, venison stew with vegetables from the root cellar. Samuel asked about the fence. Clara told him it was mended properly, would hold through the season. She didn't mention Jack Reddington. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because speaking about it would make it real, would invite questions she couldn't answer, because she didn't understand her own reaction. That night, Clara sat at her mother's old writing desk in her bedroom, the lamp turned low, and opened the recipe box. She didn't need a recipe. She just needed to feel close to something that had mattered, something that endured. Her mother's handwriting on the card for apple pie, noting that Clara had always preferred extra cinnamon. A small detail, but it spoke of being known, being remembered. Clara traced the words with her fingertip. Her mother would have been 53 now, if she'd lived. Would have grandchildren perhaps, if things had been different. If Clara had been different. The thought carried its familiar ache, but tonight it felt heavier somehow. She put the card back carefully and closed the box, then moved to the window. From here she could see across the darkened land toward where the Reddington estate lay. No lights visible from this distance, just darkness and stars. She wondered what Jack Reddington did in that big house all alone. Whether he felt the weight of empty rooms the way she sometimes felt the weight of this one. The next morning brought Sunday, which meant church. Clara dreaded Sundays, the weekly reminder that she existed on the margins of Copper Ridge society. But her father expected it, and she wouldn't disappoint him. So she put on her best dress, navy blue with white collar, and tried not to notice how tight it had gotten across the bodice. The church sat at the center of town, white clapboard with a modest steeple. People gathered in clusters outside before service, the Wagner sisters holding court near the steps. Judith and Eleanor Wagner, spinsters in their 50s, who knew everyone's business and shared it freely. They fell silent as Clara and her father approached, then resumed their conversation in pointed whispers. Inside, the Dawsons took their usual place in the back pew. Clara kept her eyes forward during Reverend Miller's sermon about forgiveness and judgment, tried not to hear the shuffling and whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere. When it ended, she made her escape as quickly as propriety allowed, waiting outside while her father spoke with a few of the other ranchers about cattle prices. Clara Dawson. The voice belonged to Judith Wagner, her thin face pinched with barely concealed delight. "Is it true you were seen talking with Jack Reddington?" Clara's stomach dropped. Of course someone had seen them. In ranch country there were always eyes. "I was mending fence on our property," Clara said evenly. "He rode by and asked if I needed assistance." "How neighborly," Eleanor chimed in, her tone suggesting anything but, "though I'm surprised a young woman would speak with such a man, especially alone, out in the open like that. There's nothing improper about a civil conversation," Clara replied, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Of course not, dear," Judith said, patting Clara's arm with false sympathy, "though you might want to be careful. A man like that, with his reputation, well, people might get the wrong idea. Not that anyone would think he had genuine interest, you understand. But appearances matter." The implication hung clear in the air. A man like Jack Reddington wouldn't want a woman like Clara. Therefore, any interaction must be suspect, possibly even deserving of mockery. Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of walls closing in. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that Jack had been nothing but courteous. But what was the point? The Wagner sisters had already decided what they believed, and nothing Clara said would change that. Her father appeared at her elbow, his weathered face unreadable. Clara, time to head home. She'd never been more grateful for his timing. They walked to the wagon in silence, Samuel helping her up before taking the reins. As they rolled out of town, passing the general store and the saloon and the neat little houses with their white picket fences, Clara stared straight ahead. "Don't let them poison your thoughts," Samuel said quietly. It was the most he'd spoken about the town's treatment of her in years. "Your mother always said small minds create small judgments." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Her father reached over and squeezed her hand once, brief but firm, before returning his attention to the road. The week that followed settled into familiar patterns. Clara worked the books, tended the animals, managed the household. She rode the fence lines and checked the cattle, repaired a loose shingle on the barn roof, helped her father with a difficult calving. The work was endless, as it always was on a ranch, but it gave her purpose. Structure. She tried not to think about Jack Reddington, tried not to wonder if she'd see him again, tried not to replay their brief conversation, analyzing every word for meaning that probably wasn't there. The Wagner sisters were right about one thing. A man of his wealth and standing had no reason to be interested in a woman like her. But on Thursday afternoon, when Clara walked out to the chicken coop to collect eggs, she found something that made her stop in her heart. Sitting on the porch railing, carefully positioned where she couldn't miss it, was a hand-carved wooden horse. Clara picked it up with trembling fingers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail rendered perfectly, the arch of the neck, the flare of the nostrils, the powerful hindquarters. It was clearly meant to be a mare, and something about the proportions reminded her of dance. The wood had been polished to a satin smoothness, warm under her touch. There was no note, no indication of who had left it, but Clara knew. She stood on the porch, holding the carving, looking north toward the Reddington land, and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. She brought the horse inside and set it on her dresser, where she could see it from her bed. That night, sleep came slowly. She kept thinking about the time it would have taken to create something so beautiful. The patience, the attention to detail. Someone had carved this specifically for her, had noticed what horse she rode, had cared enough to capture it in wood. By Friday morning, Clara had convinced herself she was reading too much into a simple gift. Maybe Jack Reddington left carvings for all his neighbors. Maybe it was just his way of being friendly. But when she rode out to check the eastern pasture and saw him riding along his side of the property line, her heart betrayed her with its sudden race. He raised a hand in greeting, and she found herself guiding Dancer toward him before she could second-guess the decision. They met at the fence line, their horses standing easy while Clara searched for words. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the carving. It's beautiful." Jack's expression didn't change much, but something softened around his eyes. "Glad you liked it. Seemed right somehow. You and that mare of yours, you didn't have to do that." "Wanted to." He shifted in his saddle, and for the first time Clara saw uncertainty in him. This dangerous man people feared was nervous talking to her. The realization was startling. "Been working with wood since I was a boy. Keeps my hands busy." "Well, it's the nicest thing anyone's given me in a long time," Clara said honestly. Too honestly, perhaps, but she was tired of pretending, tired of hiding behind walls that hadn't protected her from anything except the possibility of connection. "Then I'm glad I left it," Jack said. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday evening, unexpected and violent as spring storms often were in this part of Texas. Clara had been watching the sky all afternoon, noting the way clouds built up dark and heavy to the west. Her father had taken the wagon into town for supplies, and she'd urged him to hurry back before the weather turned. By 5 o'clock the wind had picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the yard. The chickens huddled in their coop, and the horses stamped nervously in their stalls. Clara moved through the barn, checking that everything was secure, that the animals had water and feed in case the storm lasted through the night. She was latching the barn door when the first drops hit, fat and heavy. Within minutes, it became a deluge. Rain swept across the land in grey sheets, driven sideways by wind that howled around the corners of the buildings. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. Clara ran for the house, soaked through before she reached the porch. Inside, she toweled her hair and changed into dry clothes, then went to the kitchen to start supper. Her father would be home soon, wet and tired and hungry. She'd have hot coffee waiting and something warm to eat. But an hour passed, then two, and Samuel didn't return. The storm intensified, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the windows. Clara tried not to worry. Her father knew every road and trail for 50 miles. He'd likely taken shelter somewhere, waiting out the worst of it. Still, unease prickled at the back of her neck. She was standing at the window, watching lightning illuminate the yard in brief, stark flashes when she heard it. A crash from the direction of the barn, then the unmistakable sound of a horse's frightened whinny. Clara grabbed her coat and a lantern, fighting her way back out into the storm. The barn door she'd carefully latched stood open, swinging wild in the wind. Inside, 4 horses remained in their stalls, but Dancer's stood empty, the gate hanging crooked on its hinges. Clara's heart dropped. The mare must have panicked in the storm, kicked her way free. She couldn't leave Dancer out in this. The horse could injure herself, could run onto someone else's property, could get tangled in fence wire or fall in the dark. Clara didn't hesitate. She saddled one of the geldings, a steady old boy named Tucker, who wouldn't spook easy, and rode out into the night. The rain was blinding. Clara could barely see 10 feet ahead, even with the lantern. She guided Tucker by instinct more than sight, heading in the direction she thought Dancer would run, north, toward open land, away from the buildings and noise that frightened her. The ground had turned to mud, treacherous and slick. Tucker picked his way carefully, but Clara urged him faster. Every minute Dancer was out here was another minute something terrible could happen. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, Clara thought she saw movement ahead, a darker shape against the darkness. She called Dancer's name, her voice lost in the wind and thunder. Tucker pushed forward, climbing a low rise, and suddenly the land opened up before them. Clara realized with a jolt that they'd crossed onto Reddington property. She was trespassing, but there was no time to worry about that now. Another flash of lightning, and she saw Dancer clearly. The mare was tangled in fence wire, pulling against it in panic, making things worse. Blood streaked her foreleg where the barbs had cut deep. Clara's stomach clenched. She slid from Tucker's saddle and approached slowly, speaking low and calm despite the storm. "Easy, girl, easy now. I've got you." Dancer rolled her eyes white with fear, but Clara's voice seemed to reach through the panic. The mare stilled, trembling. Clara carefully began working the wire free, her fingers clumsy in the rain and dark. The barbs were vicious, designed to keep cattle in, and they'd wrapped tight. She was so focused on freeing Dancer that she didn't hear the horse approaching until a voice cut through the storm. "Hold still, let me help." Jack Reddington materialized out of the darkness like something conjured. He wore a long duster coat that streamed water, his hat pulled low against the rain. He moved with purpose, dismounting and approaching Dancer with the same careful calm Clara had used. "Wire cutters," he said, pulling a pair from his coat pocket. "Hold her head. Keep her still." Clara moved to Dancer's head, gripping the halter, murmuring reassurance. The mare's sides heaved with panicked breathing, but she trusted Clara enough to stay relatively still. Jack worked quickly, cutting through the wire where it wrapped around Dancer's leg, carefully pulling it free. His hands were steady despite the storm, despite the nervous horse and the darkness. When the last strand came free, Dancer lurched forward. Clara held tight, keeping her from bolting again. Jack stepped back, watching as Clara checked the mare's injuries. The cuts were deep but clean. They'd need cleaning and wrapping, but nothing looked broken. "She'll be all right," Jack said. It wasn't a question. He'd assessed the damage as quickly as Clara had, but she shouldn't walk far on that leg tonight. "My barn's a mile south," Clara said, her voice shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. From fear or cold or relief, she couldn't tell. "My barn's 200 yards that way." Jack pointed north. "She can stay there tonight. I'll help you get her settled, then see you home." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the independence she'd relied on her whole life. But Dancer was hurt. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Jack was right. 200 yards was better than a mile in these conditions. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Jack gathered Dancer's lead rope and began walking, moving slow so the mare could manage on 3 good legs. Clara led Tucker, and together they made their way through the rain toward the distant lights of the Reddington barn. The structure loomed larger than the Dawson barn, built of good timber and stone. Inside it was warm and dry and smelled of hay and leather and horse. 6 stalls lined one wall, only 2 occupied. Jack led Dancer to an empty stall bedded deep with fresh straw and began gathering supplies. Clara watched him work, this dangerous man the town feared. He moved with economy and care, cleaning Dancer's wounds with steady hands, applying salve, wrapping the leg with practiced ease. He'd done this before, many times. He knew animals, knew how to care for them. "You're good at this," Clara said. "Spent a lot of time around horses." Jack finished securing the bandage and stepped back, running a hand down Dancer's neck. "She'll need this change tomorrow. I can do it, or you can come by." "I'll come by." The words were out before Clara thought them through, but she meant them. Dancer was her responsibility. Jack nodded, then turned his attention to Clara, really looked at her for the first time since he'd appeared in the storm. She was soaked through despite her coat, her hair plastered to her head, mud streaking her clothes and face. She probably looked like something the cat dragged in, but Jack's expression held no judgment. "Only concern. You're shivering," he said. Clara hadn't noticed, but now that he mentioned it, she couldn't stop. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her cold and shaky. Jack removed his duster and draped it around her shoulders. It was damp, but still held his warmth, and it smelled like leather and something indefinably him. "Cedar, maybe. Wood smoke." "Come up to the house," Jack said. "Warm yourself by the fire before I take you home. Your father will have my hide if I let you catch your death." Clara wanted to argue, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She let Jack lead her from the barn, across a short distance to the house. The Reddington estate up close was impressive. 2 stories of solid construction, white-painted wood and stone, with a wide wraparound porch. The kind of house that spoke of old money and careful maintenance. Inside, Jack led her to the parlor where a fire burned low in the hearth. He added logs, stirring it back to life, then disappeared into another room. Clara stood as close to the flames as she dared, feeling warmth slowly seep back into her bones. Jack returned with a blanket and a cup of something hot. "Coffee," Clara realized, taking it gratefully. The warmth spread through her hands, into her arms. She took a sip, found it strong and bitter and perfect. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Jack settled into a chair across from her, his own cup in hand. His dark hair was wet, plastered to his head, and without the hat, Clara could see his face more clearly. The scar that ran through his eyebrow, the hard line of his jaw, the way his eyes tracked her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but didn't. "Heard the commotion," he said. "Been watching the storm from upstairs. Saw your lantern moving across my land and figured something was wrong. I'm sorry for trespassing, Don't be. Your horse needed help. He paused, then added, You did good out there. Kept your head. A lot of people would have panicked. The compliment warmed Clara more than the fire or the coffee. She wasn't used to praise, especially not from men. She looked around the room, taking in details she'd been too cold to notice before. The furnishings were fine but sparse. A sofa, 2 chairs, the fireplace. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches that spoke of a life lived here. It felt like a place someone occupied but didn't inhabit. You live here alone? Clara asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question. But Jack didn't seem offended. Mostly, have a man who comes by twice a week to help with the property. But yeah, just me otherwise. Must be quiet. I prefer it that way. He studied her over the rim of his cup. Though I'm learning there are exceptions. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. She set down her coffee, suddenly nervous. Mr. Reddington, I should probably get home. My father will be worried. Jack, he corrected. And you're right. Storm's letting up some. I'll ride with you. That's not necessary. Maybe not. But I'm doing it anyway. There was no arguing with the quiet firmness in his voice. Clara stood, reluctantly handing back the blanket. Jack retrieved her still damp coat, helping her into it with a courtesy that felt old-fashioned and somehow right. They walked back to the barn together. The rain reduced to a steady drizzle. Tucker waited patiently in the stall where Jack had put him. Jack saddled his black gelding, moved with the same efficiency he'd shown with everything else. Within minutes, they were riding south through the darkness. The storm's fury spent. They didn't speak much during the ride. The night was too quiet now after the violence of the storm, and Clara's thoughts were too tangled to make sense of conversation. She kept replaying the evening, the fear when she'd found Dancer trapped, the relief when Jack appeared, the strange intimacy of standing in his home, warming herself by his fire. When the Dawson ranch house came into view, Clara saw lamps burning in every window. Her father must be frantic. Sure enough, Samuel emerged onto the porch as they rode up, his face tight with worry that eased when he saw Clara. Thank God, Samuel said. I got home an hour ago and found the barn open, Dancer gone. Been about to ride out looking for you. She broke free in the storm, Clara explained, dismounting. Got tangled in fence wire up on Reddington land. Mr. Reddington helped me get her free. She's in his barn for the night. Leg needed tending. Samuel's gaze shifted to Jack. Still mounted, water dripping from his hat brim. For a long moment the two men studied each other. Then Samuel stepped forward, extending his hand. Samuel Dawson, I'm in your debt, Mr. Reddington. Jack dismounted and shook his hand. Jack, and no debt, just being a good neighbor. Well, good neighbors are worth their weight in gold out here. Samuel glanced at Clara, then back to Jack. You'll come for supper tomorrow night. Let us thank you properly. Clara's breath caught. Her father never invited anyone to supper, but Jack was nodding, something that might have been a smile touching his mouth. I'd like that. Thank you. He mounted again, touched his hat to both of them, and rode back into the night. Clara stood watching until he disappeared, very aware of her father's presence beside her. Clara spent Wednesday morning in a state of distraction she couldn't quite shake. She burned the biscuits, forgot to add salt to the scrambled eggs, and nearly left the chicken coop gate open. Her father said nothing, but she caught him watching her with an expression somewhere between amusement and concern. After breakfast, she rode to the Reddington place to check on Dancer. The morning was clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and birds sang from the fence posts. It should have been a pleasant ride, but Clara's stomach twisted with nerves. She found Jack in the barn, already changing Dancer's bandages. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face eased at the sight of her. Morning, he said. Was hoping you'd come by early. Leg looks good. No infection setting in. Clara knelt beside him, examining the wound herself. He was right. The cuts were clean and already starting to heal. "You did good work." At practice, Jack finished wrapping the fresh bandage and stood, offering Clara his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. His hand was warm and calloused, strong but careful. He held on a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. "There's something I want to show you," Jack said. "If you have time." Clara nodded, curious. Jack led her from the barn toward a smaller outbuilding she hadn't noticed the night before. Inside, it had been converted into a workshop. A long workbench ran along one wall covered with tools. Wood shavings littered the floor. The air smelled of cedar and pine and the earthy scent of fresh-cut wood. Shelves lined the walls, filled with carvings. Animals mostly, horses in various poses, a family of deer, a coyote with its head tilted to the moon, birds in flight, a bear standing on its hind legs. Each piece was exquisite, detailed, clearly the work of someone who'd spent years perfecting the craft. "You made all of these?" Clara breathed, moving along the shelves. "Helps me think, keeps my hands busy when my mind won't settle." Jack picked up a piece he'd been working on, a rabbit mid-leap. "Started doing it after the war. Found I needed something to focus on that wasn't about destruction." It was the first time he'd mentioned the war directly. Clara turned to face him. "You were a soldier. For 8 years, cavalry officer. Saw action in places I try not to think about anymore." His jaw tightened. "Did things I'm not proud of. Lost men I cared about. Came home different than I left." Clara understood then. The scar, the reputation for violence, the isolation. Jack Reddington had gone to war and brought pieces of it home with him. The darkness people saw in him wasn't evil. It was pain. "My mother used to say that the measure of a man isn't what war makes of him," Clara said softly. "It's what he makes of himself after." Jack looked at her with those dark eyes, and Clara saw something shift in them. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Clara touched the rabbit carving gently. "These are beautiful, Jack. You have a gift I'd like to share." Jack set the rabbit down and picked up something wrapped in cloth. He unfolded the fabric, revealing another carving, a woman on horseback, her face turned toward the horizon. The detail was stunning. The drape of her skirt, the line of her shoulders, the way her hair caught an invisible wind. Clara's throat tightened. "Is that meant to be me?" "Started it the day after I first saw you mending that fence. You looked so capable, so strong, like you belonged to the land and it belonged to you." He held it out to her. "It's not finished yet, but I wanted you to see it, wanted you to know how I see you." Clara took the carving with trembling hands. No one had ever created anything for her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen something worth preserving in wood and care. Tears pricked her eyes, and she blinked them back. "I don't know what to say," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything." Jack stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, Clara, really sees you." She looked up at him, this man the town feared, and saw only kindness in his face. Saw the loneliness that matched her own. Saw possibility where she'd long ago stopped believing any existed. "Why me? Why not you?" Jack's voice was rough. "You're strong and capable, and good. You love your father and your land. You risk yourself in a storm for a frightened horse. You look at a broken man, and don't turn away." He paused. "Maybe the better question is why you think you're not worth seeing." Clara had no answer for that. Or rather, she had too many answers. Years of whispers and sideways glances and careful exclusion. The weight of being told in 1,000 subtle ways that she wasn't enough, that she was too much, that her body disqualified her from the kind of love other women took for granted. "The town," she started, then stopped. How could she explain without sounding pathetic? "I don't care about the town," Jack said flatly. "I stopped caring what people thought of me a long time ago. Learned that people see what they want to see. Truth be damned." He was right, Clara realized. Jack had returned from war with trauma and scars, and the town had decided he was dangerous. They'd built a story around him, whispered about violence and death, and never bothered to look deeper, just as they'd looked at Clara and decided she was unworthy of love, and never bothered to see the person beneath. "I care what you think, though," Jack added quietly. "That matters to me." Clara carefully set down the carving and made a decision. She closed the distance between them and reached for his hand. Jack's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "I think you're a good man, Jack Reddington. I think the town's been wrong about you, same as they've been wrong about a lot of things." Something in Jack's expression cracked open, like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally let it out. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, old-fashioned and sweet. "Will you walk with me?" They left the workshop hand in hand, walking the grounds of the Reddington estate. Jack showed her the garden his mother had planted, now overgrown but still beautiful in a wild way. Showed her the creek that ran through the property, clear and cold and full of small fish. Told her about growing up here, about his father, who'd been hard but fair, about his mother, who died when he was 12. "Lost her to fever," Jack said, staring at the water. "One day she was fine. 3 days later she was gone. My father never recovered. He worked himself into an early grave, trying to outrun the grief." "I understand that," Clara said. "My father's been the same since my mother died. The work never ends, and I think that's how he wants it. If he stops moving, he has to feel." "And you? How do you handle it?" Clara considered the question. "I try to remember her in the small things. Her recipes, the way she hummed while she cooked. How she always found beauty in ordinary moments. I keep those pieces alive, and it helps." Jack nodded slowly. "That's good. That's healthy." He smiled slightly. "I just carve wood and avoid town." "Well, maybe we can both do better," Clara suggested. "Together." The word hung between them, full of implication. Together meant something, meant possibility, meant risk. Jack turned to face her fully, his dark eyes searching hers. "I'd like that," he said, "more than I can say." They walked back to the barn as the sun climbed higher. Dancer was ready to go home, her legs strong enough for the easy walk. Jack helped Clara saddle her, his hands brushing against hers with increasing frequency. Neither of them moved away. "Tonight," Jack said as Clara mounted, "I'll be at your place for supper. 6 o'clock. We'll be ready." Clara smiled down at him, feeling something like joy bubbling up in her chest. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Clara spent the afternoon preparing for supper, with more care than she'd given anything in years. She pulled her mother's recipe box from the shelf and selected the cards with the most notes, the most love written into them. Pot roast, with vegetables, buttermilk biscuits, apple pie with extra cinnamon. Her father watched from the doorway as she worked, his weathered face thoughtful. "You're putting in a lot of effort for a simple thank you supper." Clara paused in her kneading of biscuit dough. "Is it wrong to want things to be nice?" "Not wrong at all." Samuel moved into the kitchen, poured himself coffee. "Just want to make sure you're being careful with your heart, Clara Bear." The childhood nickname made her throat tight. "I'm 28 years old, Papa. I think I can manage my own heart. That's what worries me." Samuel sat at the table, cradling his cup. "Jack Reddington seems like a decent man. I won't deny that. But he's got a past, and past has a way of catching up. We've all got a past." "True enough. Just promise me you'll take things slow. Get to know him proper before you go giving him pieces of yourself. You can't get back." Clara wiped flour from her hands and sat across from her father. "The whole town's already decided I'm desperate enough to throw myself at any man who shows me a scrap of attention. Maybe they're right. Now you stop that." Samuel's voice went hard. "You're worth 10 of any woman in Copper Ridge, and if they can't see it, that's their failing, not yours. But that doesn't mean you should settle for the first man who does see it." "I'm not settling, Papa. I'm just letting myself hope a little." Is that so terrible? Samuel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. No, honey, it's not terrible at all. Hope's a good thing. I just want you to be happy and safe. I am safe. Jack would never hurt me. I believe that. I saw how he looked at you last night, like you were something precious. Samuel squeezed her hand. All right then, I'll trust your judgment. But if he does anything to make you uncomfortable, you tell me. Understood? Understood. They finished preparing supper together, falling into the easy rhythm they'd developed over 5 years of being a household of two. Samuel set the table while Clara pulled the roast from the oven. The biscuits came out golden, the house filled with smells that reminded Clara of her mother, of Sunday dinners and holidays, and all the times this kitchen had been the heart of their family. Jack arrived precisely at 6, riding up on his black gelding. He'd cleaned up, Clara noticed, shaved the stubble from his jaw, changed into a clean shirt and vest. His hair was damp, combed back from his face. He looked almost nervous as he knocked on the door. Samuel answered, and Clara watched from the kitchen as the two men shook hands. There was an assessment happening, the way it always did when men met, testing weight and worth. But then Samuel smiled, clapped Jack on the shoulder, and ushered him inside. Come in, come in. Clara's been cooking all afternoon. I hope you brought an appetite. I did, sir. Thank you for having me. Call me Samuel, and it's us who should be thanking you. He gestured toward the dining room. Take a seat. Clara will have everything ready in a minute. Jack caught Clara's eye as he passed through the kitchen. She smiled, suddenly shy, and he smiled back, a real smile that transformed his whole face, made him look younger, made the hard edges soften into something approachable. Dinner was better than Clara had dared hope. The food came out perfectly. Her father and Jack discovered a shared interest in breeding horses, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Jack had stories from his time in the cavalry, carefully edited for polite company but still fascinating. Samuel shared memories of his younger days running cattle across open range before fences carved up the land. Clara mostly listened, content to watch these two men she cared about connect. But Jack kept drawing her into the conversation, asking her opinion, referencing things she'd told him during their walks, making sure she knew he valued what she had to say. After the meal, they moved to the porch with coffee. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Jack complimented the food, thanked them again for the hospitality. Clara, Jack said, setting down his empty cup, would you walk me to my horse? Samuel nodded his permission, settling back in his chair with a knowing look. Clara rose, suddenly nervous again, and walked with Jack across the yard. The evening air carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine and distant rain. His horse waited patiently by the fence, dozing on 3 legs. When they reached the shadows beyond the porch light, Jack stopped and turned to face her. I had a good evening. Your father's a fine man. He likes you. I can tell. I'm glad. Jack hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. Clara, I want to be honest with you about something. I'm not good at this, at talking to people, at being around people. I spent too many years alone by choice, and I'm not entirely sure I know how to do anything else. You're doing fine, Clara said softly. What I'm trying to say is I'd like to call on you, properly, with your father's blessing and the understanding that my intentions are honorable. He squeezed her hand. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, but I'd like to change that. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. A man was courting her, and not just any man. Jack Reddington, who saw her as something precious. I'd like that too. Jack exhaled, relief evident on his face. Good. That's good. He lifted her hand to his lips again. That same old-fashioned gesture that made her feel cherished. I'll come by Saturday if that suits. We could ride out, maybe have a picnic, get to know each other away from the eyes of others. Saturday would be perfect. They stood there in the darkness, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, Jack released her hand and mounted his horse. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Jack." She watched him ride away until the darkness swallowed him, then returned to the porch where her father still sat. He looked up at her with gentle eyes. So he asked to court me, with your blessing, which I assume he has." Clara sat beside her father, leaning her head on his shoulder the way she had when she was small. "Do I have yours?" Samuel wrapped an arm around her. "You're a grown woman, Clara. You don't need my permission, but yes, you have my blessing. He seems like a good man who's had some hard years, and the way he looks at you." He paused. "Your mother looked at me that way once, like I hung the moon just for her." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "I miss her, Papa." "I know, honey. I do too. Every day." He kissed the top of her head. "But she'd be happy for you right now. She'd be telling you to grab hold of this and not let go. Life's too short to waste chances at happiness." The next few days passed in a pleasant blur. Clara found herself humming while she worked, catching herself smiling at nothing. Her father teased her gently about being distracted, but his eyes were warm with approval. On Thursday, Martha Hayes came by with more preserves and undisguised curiosity. They sat in the kitchen over tea, and Clara found herself telling Martha about Jack, about the carved horses and the workshop, and the way he really listened when she spoke. "I'm happy for you," Martha said, squeezing Clara's hand. "And don't you let the Wardner sisters or anyone else poison this for you. You deserve good things, Clara Dawson." But on Friday morning, Clara rode into town for supplies and felt the change immediately. The Wardner sisters stood outside the general store, their faces pinched with disapproval. When Clara approached, they made no effort to lower their voices. "It's unseemly," Judith Wardner said loudly. "A woman her age throwing herself at a man with his reputation. Desperate times call for desperate measures, I suppose," Eleanor added, with false sympathy, though one would think she'd have more pride. Clara felt the old familiar burn of shame and anger. She lifted her chin and walked past them into the store, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, their words burrowed deep, feeding doubts she'd thought she'd put to rest. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the land. Clara dressed with care, choosing her riding skirt and a blouse her mother had made years ago, simple but well-fitted, the fabric a soft cream that Clara had always thought brought out the color in her cheeks. Jack arrived at noon with a picnic basket strapped to his saddle and that same quiet smile that made Clara's stomach flutter. Her father came out to see them off, giving Jack a look that clearly said to take care of his daughter. Jack nodded his understanding, helped Clara mount Dancer, and they rode north together. He led her to a place she'd never been, a meadow on his property, where a massive oak tree spread its branches wide. Beneath it, a small creek bubbled over smooth stones. The grass grew thick and green, dotted with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. It was the kind of place that felt separate from the world, hidden and peaceful. "Used to come here as a boy," Jack said, dismounting and helping Clara down. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Felt like my secret spot. Haven't shared it with anyone in 20 years. It's beautiful," Clara breathed. They spread a blanket beneath the oak and unpacked the basket. Jack had brought cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese and apples. Simple food, but good. They ate in companionable quiet, watching the water flow past. "Tell me about your mother," Jack said, eventually. "You mention her often, but I'd like to know more." Clara swallowed a bite of apple, considering where to start. She was the kind of woman who found joy in small things. A perfect biscuit. Wildflowers in a jar. The sound of rain on the roof. "She taught me to cook, to sew, to see beauty in the ordinary." Clara paused, "and she never made me feel like I wasn't enough. Even when the town did, she made me feel worthy." "You are worthy," Jack said firmly. "Easy to say, harder to believe when you've spent a lifetime being told otherwise." Jack set down his food, and shifted closer. "Clara, look at me." She did, meeting those dark eyes. "I've killed men, not in cold blood, but in war and in defense of others. I've made choices that haunt me, choices I'll carry to my grave. The town fears me because of those choices, and maybe they're right to." He reached for her hand. "But when I look at you, I don't see someone who's not enough. I see someone who's more than I deserve. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that you're worth seeing, worth knowing, worth loving." The last word hung between them. Too large and too soon, but somehow exactly right. Clara's breath caught. "Jack, I'm not saying I love you. Not yet. We barely know each other." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But I'm saying I could. I'm saying I want the chance to." Clara had built walls around her heart for so many years, brick by painful brick. She'd protected herself from hope, from possibility, from the kind of hurt that came from wanting things she couldn't have. But Jack Reddington was asking her to tear those walls down, to be vulnerable, to risk everything for the chance at something real. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." Jack's honesty was startling. Terrified, actually. "I haven't let anyone close in years. Easier to be alone than to risk losing someone else. But then I saw you mending that fence, and I thought maybe I could try again." Clara squeezed his hand. "Then we'll try together, and we'll be scared together." Jack smiled, a real full smile that transformed his entire face. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, gentle and questioning. Clara's eyes fluttered closed as she kissed him back, her first real kiss at 28 years old. It was soft and sweet and perfect. When they pulled apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the storm. What took you so long?" Clara asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Wanted to do it right. Wanted you to know it meant something." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Jack told her about his years in the cavalry, the places he'd seen, the men he'd served with. Some stories were funny, full of the kind of mischief young soldiers got into. Others were darker, and Clara saw shadows pass across his face when he spoke of friends lost, of battles that still visited him in nightmares. "Do you regret it?" Clara asked. "Going to war?" Jack considered the question seriously. "I regret the necessity of it. I regret every life lost, including the ones I took. But I don't regret serving. It taught me things about myself, about what I'm capable of, for good and ill." He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "It also taught me that coming home doesn't mean the war's over. Not inside. Is that why you carve? To quiet the war inside?" "Partly. Carving's about creation instead of destruction, about making something beautiful that wasn't there before." He looked at her. "Helps me remember I'm not just the things I've done, that I can still make something good." Clara understood that need on a bone-deep level. She'd spent years trying to prove she was more than her body, more than the sum of others' judgments. "I think you're already something good, Jack. The carving's just a reflection of what's inside. You see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. Maybe that's not a bad thing." As the sun began its descent, they packed up reluctantly. Jack helped Clara onto Dancer, then mounted his own horse. They rode back slowly, neither wanting the day to end. When they reached the Dawson ranch, Samuel was on the porch, and he smiled at the sight of them. "Have a good ride." "Very good," Clara confirmed, dismounting. Jack did the same, walking her to the porch steps. "Thank you for today," Clara said softly, aware of her father's presence, but not caring. "It was perfect. First of many, I hope." Jack touched her cheek briefly, then nodded to Samuel and rode away. That night, Clara lay in bed holding the unfinished carving Jack had given her, the woman on horseback. She traced the details with her fingertips, marveling at the skill and care evident in every line. This was how Jack saw her: strong, capable, beautiful in her own way. The thought filled her with warmth. The following week brought a comfortable rhythm. Jack called on Tuesday evening, staying for supper. He and Samuel discussed plans for breeding a mare to Jack's stallion, their conversation easy and technical. On Thursday, Clara rode to Jack's property, and he showed her more of his land. They found a family of foxes denning near the creek, and Jack carved a small fox kit from a piece of cedar while they watched the animals play. Friday brought Clara back to town for supplies. She'd been dreading it but couldn't put it off any longer. The ranch needed staples, and she refused to hide because of gossip. Martha greeted her warmly in the general store, but Clara felt the weight of stares from other customers. The Wagner sisters were there again, along with several other women Clara had known her whole life. Women who'd gone to church with her, who'd attended school with her, who now looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. "I heard he bought her jewelry," one woman whispered, not quietly enough, trying to buy her affection since he couldn't earn them honestly. "Well, what else would a woman like her do?" Another replied, "It's not as if she has other options." Clara's hands trembled as she selected flour and sugar. She kept her head high, but inside the old wounds reopened. The suggestion that Jack's interest couldn't be genuine, that she was so desperate, so unworthy, that she'd settle for anyone. Martha noticed Clara's distress and came to stand beside her.
"Don't listen to them, dear. Jealous hens. The lot of them. Jealous of what?"
Clara asked bitterly. "They all have husbands, families. What could they possibly envy about me? That you've caught the attention of the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. That he looks at you like you're the only woman in the world. That takes some people who've settled for less than they wanted." Clara wanted to believe Martha, wanted to think that jealousy rather than truth motivated the whispers. But doubt was a persistent thing, fed by years of learning she wasn't desirable. She paid for her supplies and left quickly, aware of eyes following her out. That evening, Jack arrived for supper and immediately knew something was wrong. After they ate and Samuel retired to his study, Jack took Clara's hand and led her to the porch. "Tell me what's bothering you." Clara tried to brush it off, but Jack was patient. He waited, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm, until the words spilled out. "The town's talking, saying cruel things, suggesting you couldn't possibly be interested in me genuinely, that I'm desperate, that you're, She faltered. "That I'm what?" "That you're taking advantage of my loneliness, that maybe you have less honorable intentions than you claim." Jack's jaw tightened dangerously. "Give me names." "No." Clara squeezed his hand. "That would only make things worse. I just need to know." She forced herself to look at him. "Is any of it true? Are you courting me because you feel sorry for me? Because I'm convenient?" Jack's eyes flashed with anger, but not at her. "Clara, look at me. Really look at me." He waited until she met his gaze. "I'm courting you because when I'm with you the world makes sense again. Because you see me as a man instead of a monster. Because you're kind and strong and beautiful, and I thank God every day that you gave me a chance. But I'm not beautiful. Don't." Jack's voice was sharp. "Don't let their poison become your truth. You are beautiful. Your smile, your strength, the way you care for your father and your animals, the way you see good in people. That's real beauty, Clara. The kind that lasts." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. Jack wiped them away gently, with his thumbs cradling her face in his hands. "I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control, to have people decide who you are without knowing you. But I also know that their judgments don't define us unless we let them." "How do you not let them?" "By choosing to believe the people who matter. Your father believes in you, Martha believes in you, and I believe in you." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Most importantly, you need to believe in yourself." Clara leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. Jack held her for a long moment, and Clara felt some of the doubt ease. Not disappear, but loosen its grip enough that she could breathe. The next week brought a new complication. Clara was going over the ranch books when she discovered an error in the bank's calculations. Or rather, not an error, a deliberate manipulation. The interest they'd been charged had increased without notice, and when she traced back through previous statements, she found the pattern extended months. She showed her father, who grew grim. We need to go to the bank. This isn't right. Monday morning, Clara and Samuel rode into town together. The bank was a small brick building on Main Street, run by a man named Garrett Boone. He was perhaps 50, impeccably dressed, with cold grey eyes and a smile that never reached them. His family owned considerable land in the territory, and he had a reputation for shrewd business practices. Boone received them in his office, all false courtesy. Samuel, Clara, what can I do for you? Samuel laid out the discrepancies in their statement. Boone examined them with barely concealed impatience, then shrugged. I'm afraid you're mistaken. These calculations are correct. They're not, Clara said firmly. The interest rate changed without notification. That's not legal. Boone's eyes turned cold as they fixed on her. Miss Dawson, I hardly think you're qualified to judge legal matters. Perhaps you should leave the business discussions to your father. My daughter handles our books, Samuel said, his voice hard. And she's right. You've been overcharging us. I assure you, everything is in order. Boone stood, signaling the meeting was over. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other appointments. If you have concerns, you're welcome to seek another lender, though I doubt you'll find anyone willing to take on your risk. The threat was clear. Pay what Boone claimed they owed, or lose the ranch entirely. Clara and her father left the bank in frustrated silence. On the street, they nearly collided with Jack, who'd been heading to the general store. He took one look at their faces, and his expression darkened. What happened? Samuel explained about the bank, about Boone's manipulation and dismissal. Jack listened with growing tension in his shoulders. When Samuel finished, Jack was quiet for a long moment. Garrett Boone, Jack said finally, his voice tight. I should have warned you about him. You know him? Clara asked. Know of him. His family owns land throughout the territory, but they didn't come by all of it honestly. Jack glanced around the street, noting curious onlookers. Not here. Come to my place this afternoon. There's something you need to know. They agreed and parted ways. Clara and Samuel returned home, both unsettled. At 2 o'clock, they rode to the Reddington estate. Jack met them at the door. His face grave, he led them to his study, a room Clara hadn't seen before. Dark wood panels, shelves of books, and a large desk covered with papers. Jack pulled out a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges. This belonged to my father. He kept detailed records of land transactions throughout the territory, including some of Boone's. He opened to a marked page. 5 years ago, the Mercer family lost their ranch. Bank foreclosed. Sold it at auction. Boone bought it for a fraction of its value. That's legal, if unfortunate, Samuel said. It is. Except my father suspected Boone had manipulated the Mercers into default the same way he's doing to you, changing terms, adding fees, making it impossible to keep up. Jack flipped through more pages. There are 4 other families here with similar stories. All lost their land. All of it ended up in Boone's hands. Clara felt cold. Why didn't your father do anything? He tried, but Boone's careful. He keeps everything just barely legal, and he has powerful friends, including the territorial judge. Jack's expression was grim. My father died before he could gather enough evidence to challenge him. So we're trapped, Clara said, despair creeping in. Either we pay money we don't have, or we lose everything. Not if we can prove what he's doing. Jack closed the journal. I've been thinking about this since you told me. If Boone's targeting you the way he targeted others, there must be a pattern. We need to find the other families, talk to them, compile evidence. Samuel shook his head. Those families are long gone, scattered after they lost their land. Some are, but some might still be in the territory. Jack stood, pacing. It's worth trying. If we can show a pattern of manipulation, we might be able to bring it before a federal court. Bypass Boone's local connections. Clara looked at this man who'd come into her life just weeks ago, who was now ready to fight her battles. Why would you do this? Risk making an enemy of Boone? Jack stopped pacing and met her eyes. Because you're important to me, your family, your home, they matter. And because men like Boone need to be stopped. He paused. And if I'm being completely honest, because I've spent too long standing aside while bad things happened. I'm done with that. Samuel studied Jack for a long moment, then extended his hand. Then we'd appreciate your help and your friendship. Jack shook his hand firmly. You have both. They spent the next hour going through the journal, making notes of names and date. It was meticulous work, but Clara felt hope stirring for the first time since discovering the bank's deception. With Jack's help, maybe they had a chance. As evening approached and they prepared to leave, Jack pulled Clara aside. This won't be easy. Boone's dangerous in his own way, if he realizes what we're doing. I know. Clara took his hand. But we don't have a choice. This is my home, Jack. My family's legacy. I have to fight for it. Then we fight together. He squeezed her hand. I promise you, Clara, I won't let you lose this place. It was a promise he couldn't guarantee, but Clara loved him for making it anyway. Loved him. The realization hit her with startling clarity. She loved Jack Reddington. This complicated, damaged, beautiful man who'd chosen to see her worth. The next 2 weeks passed in tense determination. Jack, Clara and Samuel worked to track down the families mentioned in the journal. Some had left the territory entirely, but they found 3 who remained. Each told the same story. Unexplained fee increases, changing loan terms, pressure from Boone to sell before foreclosure. The pattern was undeniable. Clara felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. The ranch work continued. The animals still needed tending, but now every task carried the shadow of potential loss. She worked the books late into the night, trying to find money that simply wasn't there. Jack visited daily, sometimes staying for supper, sometimes just riding the property with Clara. Their relationship deepened in the quiet spaces between worry. He taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts, his body warm behind hers as he adjusted her stance. She showed him her mother's garden, now overgrown, and they spent an afternoon clearing weeds and coaxing life back into it. On a Thursday evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Jack pulled something from his pocket. A small leather pouch. I want to give you something. Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a horse mid-gallop. Simple but beautifully crafted. Jack, this is too much. It's not enough. He took the necklace and fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin there. I wanted you to have something that reminds you you're not alone in this. That I'm with you, whatever comes. Clara touched the pendant, tears stinging her eyes. Thank you. They were leaning in for a kiss when they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching, both tense. It was late for visitors. Jack stood, his hand moving instinctively to where a gun would have been. Samuel emerged from the house, his face wary. 5 riders came into view. Garrett Boone led them, flanked by 4 rough-looking men. Clara didn't recognize. They reined up in front of the porch, and Boone's cold smile sent ice down Clara's spine. Samuel, Clara. Boone's gaze moved to Jack, and something like satisfaction crossed his face. And Jack Reddington. How convenient. Saves me a trip. What do you want, Boone? Samuel's voice was hard. Boone dismounted, his men staying on their horses. I'm here as a courtesy, to inform you that I'm calling in your loan. Full payment due in 30 days, or the ranch goes to auction." "You can't do that," Clara said. "We have 6 months remaining on the note." "Check the fine print, Miss Dawson. I can accelerate the loan if I have reasonable concern about repayment. And given your mounting arrears, I have considerable concern." Boone's smile widened. "Of course, I'm prepared to be generous. I'll buy the ranch from you directly. Fair price. You won't have to endure the embarrassment of public auction." "The embarrassment of theft, you mean?" Jack said quietly. His voice was calm, but Clara heard the danger in it. "We know what you're doing, Boone. We know about the Mercers, the Johnsons, the others. You've been running this scheme for years." Boone's expression didn't change, but his eyes went flat. "Careful, Reddington. You're making serious accusations." "I'm stating facts." Jack descended the porch steps, putting himself between Boone and Clara. "You manipulate families into default, then swoop in to buy their land cheap. It's fraud. It's business." Boone turned his attention back to Samuel. 30 days, Dawson. After that, the ranch is mine one way or another." He remounted, then paused. "Oh, and Reddington, I should mention something about that incident in Denver 5 years ago." Jack went very still. Clara saw his hands curl into fists. "What about it?" "The man you killed was my brother." The words dropped like stones into water. Clara felt the world tilt. Jack had killed someone, not in war, not in some distant past. 5 years ago, in Denver. Boone's smile turned predatory. "Thomas Boone, my younger brother. You shot him in a Denver saloon. Claimed self-defense, of course. Rich man's justice saw you walk free." "It was self-defense," Jack said, his voice tight. "Your brother drew first." "So you say, but Thomas is still dead, and you're still walking around courting pretty ranchers' daughters." Boone's gaze shifted to Clara, and she saw genuine hatred there. "Tell me, Miss Dawson, did your dangerous beau mention he's a killer, that he took a man's life over a card game?" Clara couldn't breathe. She looked at Jack, saw the truth written in the rigid line of his shoulders, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. He'd kept this from her. This enormous, terrible thing. "It wasn't over cards," Jack said. "Your brother and 3 of his friends cornered a homesteader in that saloon. They were beating him to death over a land dispute. I intervened. You killed him. I stopped him. He drew on me. I defended myself." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't want to kill anyone, but your brother gave me no choice." "There's always a choice." Boone gathered his reins. 30 days, Dawson. "And Reddington, stay away from this family. You've brought them nothing but trouble. You're poison, and everyone you touch suffers for it." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Silence fell over the porch like a shroud. Clara stood frozen, her mind spinning. Jack had killed a man. Not in war, but in Denver, 5 years ago. And he'd never told her, never thought she deserved to know that the man courting her had taken a life. "Clara," Jack started, turning to her. "Is it true?" Her voice came out small. "Did you kill his brother?" "Yes, but not the way he made it sound." Jack stepped toward her, and she stepped back. Pain flashed across his face. "Let me explain." "You should have explained before." Clara's hands were shaking. "Before you started courting me, before I started caring about you, before I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Before I fell in love with you." Samuel placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Let's all calm down and talk about this inside." But Clara shook her head. "I need air. I need to think." She walked away from the porch, away from Jack's stricken face, away from the confusion and hurt churning in her chest. She walked until she reached the barn, then slipped inside and leaned against Dancer's stall. The mare nickered softly, pressing her nose to Clara's shoulder. "I'm such a fool," Clara whispered. The town had been right. Desperate Clara Dawson, throwing herself at the first man who showed interest, ignoring all the warning signs. Jack Reddington was dangerous. He'd killed a man. She'd been so starved for affection that she'd convinced herself none of it mattered. Footsteps behind her. She turned to find her father, not Jack. Samuel leaned against the opposite stall, his expression thoughtful. "He's still out on the porch. Won't leave until he knows you're all right." "I'm not all right." "No, I expect you're not." Samuel crossed his arms. But before you make any decisions, let me tell you something. I did some checking after Boone left. Sent a telegram to an old ranger friend in Denver. Got the reply this afternoon. Clara looked up, and Jack told the truth. Thomas Boone and his gang were beating a homesteader named Marcus Webb. Would have killed him if Jack hadn't stepped in. When Jack tried to stop them, Thomas drew his gun. Jack was faster. 3 witnesses confirmed it was self-defense. The territorial marshal cleared him. Then why didn't he tell me? Maybe because he's ashamed. Maybe because it's hard to talk about killing a man, even when it was justified. Samuel moved closer. Or maybe because he was afraid you'd look at him the way you're looking at him now, like he's a monster. Clara's chest tightened. I don't think he's a monster. Don't you? Because from where I'm standing, you're doing exactly what the town's been doing, judging him for his past instead of seeing who he is now. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Her father was right. She'd spent her entire life suffering under the wrath of unfair judgment, and at the first test, she'd done the same thing to Jack. She'd let Boone's poison work its way into her thoughts, had doubted the man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and honesty. I'm an idiot, Clara whispered. You're human, and you're scared. Samuel squeezed her shoulder. Boone knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to drive a wedge between you and Jack, and he almost succeeded. Question is, are you going to let him? Clara wiped tears from her cheeks. Jack should have told me, maybe. But think about it from his place. He meets a woman he's falling for, and he's got to figure out when to mention he killed a man. Too early and she runs before getting to know him. Too late, and she feels betrayed. Samuel shook his head. There's no good time for that conversation. He probably figured he'd tell you when the moment was right. Boone just took that choice away from him. Clara took a shaky breath. Her father was right. Boone had weaponized Jack's past, had used it to hurt both of them, and she'd let him. She'd let fear and old insecurities cloud her judgment of the man she loved. He's still out there? Clara asked. Still on the porch, looking like a man facing his own hanging. Clara straightened her shoulders. Then I should talk to him. She walked back to the house with her father beside her. Jack stood at the porch rail, his back to them, his shoulders bowed. When he heard their footsteps, he turned. The pain in his eyes nearly broke her. Clara, I'm so sorry, he said immediately. I should have told you. I wanted to. I just didn't know. Didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does. Clara climbed the porch steps slowly. My father told me what really happened. About Marcus Webb, about the witnesses. It's all true, every word. Jack's hands clenched at his sides. I'm not proud of taking a life, even to save one. It's something I'll carry forever, but I won't apologize for stopping men from beating an innocent person to death. I don't want you to apologize for that. Clara stopped in front of him. I want you to apologize for not trusting me enough to tell me yourself. Jack's breath caught. You're right. I should have trusted you. Would have known you'd understand. He reached for her hand, then seemed to think better of it. I was a coward, Clara. I was so afraid of losing you that I put off the hard conversation, and in doing so I hurt you worse. Clara thought about the carved horses, the picnics, the way Jack looked at her like she was precious. Thought about how he'd stepped in to help with Boone, how he'd made her father laugh, how he'd spent hours teaching her to shoot. Every action had shown his character. One terrible moment in his past didn't erase all of that. I'm sorry too, Clara said softly, for doubting you, for letting Boone's words make me forget who you really are. You had every right to doubt. I gave you reason. No, you gave me reason to trust. Clara reached for his hand this time, lacing her fingers through his. You saved a man's life, Jack. You stood up against bullies and violence. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's heroic. Jack's eyes glistened. I don't feel like a hero. Heroes rarely do. Clara squeezed his hand. But you are one. To that homesteader. To me. To my father, who's about to lose his ranch to that same family's greed. The reminder of their situation settled over them. Boone wasn't just angry about his brother. He was vindictive, and now he had leverage over both the Dawsons and Jack. The loan acceleration, the threat of foreclosure, it was all part of his revenge. Samuel joined them on the porch. We need a plan. Boone's not going to stop until he takes everything from us. And from you too, Jack. If he can manage it, then we need to be smarter than him. Jack straightened, some of his military bearing returning. We've got evidence of his pattern of fraud. We need to get it in front of someone who can't be bought. A federal marshal or a territorial judge from outside his influence. They spent that evening at Jack's dining table, papers spread before them. Jack's father's journal, the loan documents, statements from the 3 families they'd found. Everything pointed to Boone's systematic fraud, but they needed someone with authority who would listen. There's a federal marshal named William Cross, Jack said, tapping a name he'd written down. Served with his son during the war. Good man, honest. He's based out of Austin, but has jurisdiction throughout the territory. Can you reach him? Samuel asked. I can send a telegram, but it'll take time. A week, maybe 2, for him to review the evidence and decide if he'll come. Jack looked at Clara. We don't have that kind of time. Boone gave us 30 days, but I'd wager he'll push harder now that he knows we're onto him. Clara studied the documents, her mind working through possibilities. What if we stall him? File an appeal with the territorial court, claim the loan acceleration is improper. That could buy us a few weeks, Samuel agreed. Though Boone has the judge in his pocket, but the filing itself takes time to process. We just need enough delay to get Marshal Cross here. Clara looked at Jack. Can you write to him tonight? I'll draft the appeal. They worked late into the night. Jack composed a careful letter to the marshal, detailing Boone's pattern of fraud and requesting an investigation. Clara crafted legal language for the appeal, drawing on her knowledge of contracts and her mother's old books on territorial law. Samuel gathered additional documentation, every scrap of paper that might prove their case. At midnight, Martha Hayes arrived unexpectedly. She looked pale and worried. I heard what happened. Boone came through town bragging about finally getting revenge on the Reddingtons. Half the town thinks you're a murderer, Jack, and the other half thinks Clara's a fool for standing by you. What else is new? Clara said bitterly. Martha sat heavily in a chair. There's more. Boone's been talking to Deputy Fisher, suggesting that Jack might be a danger to the community, that someone should keep an eye on him. Jack's jaw tightened. He's trying to isolate me, make it look suspicious if I'm seen around the Dawson place. Exactly. Martha pulled out a small journal from her bag. But I brought you something that might help. My late husband kept records of every business transaction in town. He was the assayer before he died. I found entries about Boone's land purchases going back 15 years. Prices paid, dates, names of sellers. Some of those prices are criminally low. Clara took the journal reverently. Martha, this could be exactly what we need. Then use it to bury that snake. Martha's normally kind face was hard. He foreclosed on my husband's brother 10 years ago, took their cattle ranch for a fraction of its worth. My husband never got over the guilt of not being able to help. The revelation added weight to their mission. Boone's greed had touched so many lives, destroyed so many families. This wasn't just about saving the Dawson ranch anymore. It was about stopping a man who'd been preying on good people for decades. Over the following week, tension mounted. Jack sent his letter to Marshal Cross via express courier. Clara filed the appeal with the territorial court, which bought them a postponement of the foreclosure. But Boone fought back. He spread rumors through town, painting Jack as a violent criminal who'd manipulated the Dawson, suggested that Clara was desperate enough to overlook murder for male attention. The whispers grew louder, more vicious. Clara endured it as best she could. She held her head high when she went to town for supplies, ignored the stares and muttered comments, but each word cut deep, reopening old wounds she'd thought were healing. Jack stayed away from town entirely, knowing his presence would only make things worse. But he visited the ranch every evening, and together they continued building their case. They tracked down 2 more families Boone had defrauded, gathered more statements, compiled more evidence. Samuel pulled Clara aside one morning after Jack left. There's something I need to show you. He led her to his bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a gun belt and a tarnished badge. Texas Ranger, it read. Samuel Dawson. Clara stared at the badge, then at her father. You were a ranger? For 12 years before I met your mother. Samuel lifted the badge, turning it over in his weathered hands. The metal was tarnished, but the star was still clear. Rode with some of the finest lawmen Texas ever produced, tracked outlaws, protected settlers, kept the peace in places where peace was hard to find. Why didn't you ever tell me? Your mother made me promise to leave that life behind when we married, said she didn't want to raise a daughter, wondering if her father was coming home. Samuel's eyes grew distant. I kept that promise, hung up the badge, bought this land, became a rancher, never regretted it for a day. Then why show me now? Samuel met her gaze, and Clara saw steel there she'd never noticed before. Because I want you to understand something. If Boone pushes this to violence, if he brings his hired guns here, threatening my daughter and my home, I still remember how to fight. I'm not the young man I was, but I'm not helpless either. Clara's throat tightened. Papa, I don't want you getting hurt over this. And I don't want to see you lose everything you love because of a greedy man's vendetta. He carefully rewrapped the badge and gun belt. I'm just saying we're not without resources. And if it comes to it, Jack's not the only one here who knows his way around trouble. The conversation stayed with Clara over the following days. She'd always seen her father as a gentleman, worn down by grief and hard work, but there was more to him than she'd understood. Strength that had been dormant, waiting for a reason to resurface. 10 days after they'd filed the appeal, a response came from the territorial court. The judge, clearly influenced by Boone, had denied it. The foreclosure would proceed in 20 days unless full payment was made. They'd bought themselves time, but not enough. That same afternoon, a telegram arrived for Jack. Marshal Cross was coming. He'd reviewed the evidence and found sufficient cause for investigation. He'd arrive in Copper Ridge in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Clara said, reading the telegram again. The foreclosure happens in 20 days, if we can just hold on. Boone won't wait that long. Jack paced Jack's study where they'd gathered. He knows a federal marshal means trouble for him. He'll try to force our hand before Cross arrives. As if summoning him by speaking his name, they heard horses approaching. Clara looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. Boone rode up with 8 men this time, all armed. They surrounded the house. Jack moved to the door, but Samuel stopped him. Let me handle this. It's my ranch. They walked out together, the 3 of them presenting a united front. Boone sat his horse with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Samuel, I've been thinking about our situation, and I've decided to be generous. I'm prepared to give you 2 more weeks to vacate. That's more than fair. The court gave us 20 days. Clara said, the court made a mistake. I'm accelerating the foreclosure. You have 14 days to leave, or I'll have the sheriff remove you forcibly. Boone's smile was cold. I suggest you take the offer. Fighting will only make this harder on everyone. We're not leaving. Samuel's voice carried absolute conviction. This is my land, bought and paid for. You're trying to steal it through fraud, and we're not going to let you. Boone's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, old man. You and your daughter and your murderous friend here. I own this town. I own the bank, the judge, half the businesses. You think you can fight me? I think we can try. Jack stepped forward, his presence radiating controlled danger. And I think you should leave before this gets ugly. Is that a threat? Boone's hand moved toward his coat, and his men tensed. Because I have witnesses here who'll testify you threatened me, that you're dangerous, that maybe the good people of Copper Ridge need protection from you. No threat, just a statement of fact. Jack didn't back down. You want this ranch, you'll have to take it by force. And that means going through me. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Boone's men shifted in their saddles, hands near weapons, Jack stood perfectly still, but Clara recognized the coiled readiness in him. Her father's posture had changed too, become straighter, more alert. The old ranger, emerging from decades of dormancy. Clara stepped between them, her heart hammering, but her voice steady. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Marshal Cross is coming to investigate your business practices, Mr. Boone. When he arrives, everything will come to light. Every family you've defrauded, every manipulation, every idle fee, is your revenge really worth federal prison? Boone's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. No marshal's coming. Check with the Austin office if you don't believe us. Clara pulled the telegram from her pocket and held it up. Federal Marshal William Cross will be here in 14 days. The same day your foreclosure is supposed to happen. What do you think he'll find when he investigates your loan practices? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Boone's face. He'd built his empire on corruption hidden behind legal technicalities, on judges he could control and witnesses he could intimidate. But a federal marshal answered to different authority. Doesn't matter, Boone said, but his voice lacked conviction. The foreclosure proceeds as scheduled. The marshal can investigate all he wants after the property's already mine, except it won't be. Jack's tone was flat, factual. Because we'll fight it. We'll file injunctions, appeals, every legal challenge we can think of. We'll drag this out until Cross gets here and exposes what you've been doing, and then it won't just be this ranch you lose. It'll be all of them. Every piece of land you've stolen. Boone's composure cracked. Rage twisted his features. My brother died because of you. You don't get to take the moral high ground here, Reddington. You're a killer. I'm a man who stopped your brother from beating someone to death. If that makes me a killer, then yes. Jack took a step forward. But at least I only killed one man, in defense of another. How many families have you destroyed, Boone? How many lives ruined? How much blood is on your hands? The accusation hung in the air. Boone's men exchanged glances. Uncomfortable. Maybe they'd heard stories. Maybe they were starting to question who they were working for. Boone jerked his reins, his horse sidling. 14 days. If you're still here, I'll have you removed by force. All of you, he glared at his men. Let's go. They wheeled their horses and thundered away, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Clara released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. That was well done, Samuel said, sitting beside her, buying time with the marshal, making him uncertain. He's going to come back, Clara said, and next time he won't talk first. Probably not. Jack joined them, his face grim. Which means we need to be ready. We've got 2 weeks to prepare. Over the following days, they fortified. Jack taught Clara and Samuel defensive positions around the ranch house, places with good sightlines and cover. He checked every rifle and pistol they owned, made sure they had ammunition. Samuel's old ranger instincts kicked in, and he contributed tactical knowledge Jack hadn't considered. They sent word to the families they'd interviewed, asking them to come to Copper Ridge when Marshal Cross arrived. Each agreed, willing to testify against Boone. Martha pledged her support and her late husband's record. Even Deputy Fisher, who'd remained neutral until now, quietly promised he'd stand with them if violence erupted. Clara continued working the ranch, maintaining normalcy even as they prepared for conflict. She found comfort in routine. Morning chores, tending animals, cooking meals. Jack stayed close, sleeping in the barn so he'd be nearby if trouble came at night. One evening as they sat together on the porch watching stars emerge, Jack took Clara's hand. If this goes badly, if something happens to me, don't. Clara squeezed his hand. Don't talk like that. I need to, just in case. Jack turned to face her. I want you to know that these past weeks with you have been the best of my life. You made me believe I could be more than my mistakes, that I deserved happiness. You do deserve it. We both. Clara touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "And we're going to survive this. We're going to beat Boone, save the ranch, and build a life together. That's the only future I'm willing to accept." Jack kissed her, deep and desperate, like he was memorizing the taste of her. The 14th day dawned clear and cold. Marshal William Cross had arrived in Copper Ridge the night before, taking a room at the boarding house. Jack had met with him for 2 hours, presenting all their evidence. Cross was a stern man in his 50s, with iron-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and finally nodded. "I'll need to examine the bank records directly," Cross had said, "and interview the affected families. But what you've shown me is compelling. If half of it's true, Boone's been running a criminal enterprise for years." Now at dawn, they prepared for what they knew was coming. Boone wouldn't let the foreclosure deadline pass without action. He'd try to force them out before Cross could complete his investigation. The question was how and when. Clara checked her rifle for the 3rd time, her hands steadier than she'd expected. She wore her riding clothes, practical and allowing movement. Her mother's recipe box sat on the kitchen table, and she'd tucked a photograph of her parents into her pocket. Small talismans against the chaos to come. Jack stood at the front window, watching the road. Samuel positioned himself at the side window with his old Ranger rifle. They'd barricaded the doors with furniture, prepared water and bandages in case someone was wounded. The house had become a fortress. "They're coming," Jack said quietly. Clara moved to the window. A group of riders approached from town. Not Boone's usual 8, 12 men this time, heavily armed. They spread out as they neared the ranch, encircling the property. Boone rode at their center, his face hard with determination. "That's more than hired guns," Samuel observed. "He's brought his whole operation." They stopped 50 yards from the house. Boone dismounted, and 2 men flanked him as he walked forward. He carried a paper in his hand. "Samuel Dawson, by order of the Territorial Court and the Copper Ridge Bank, this property is now in foreclosure. You have 1 hour to vacate before we remove you by force." Samuel opened the door slightly, staying behind cover. "That foreclosure's under federal investigation. You can't enforce it." "The hell I can't. I have a court order. And I have a federal marshal who says otherwise." Samuel's voice carried the authority of his Ranger days. "Marshal Cross is in town right now, reviewing evidence of your fraud. You proceed with this, you're interfering with a federal investigation. That's prison time, Boone." Boone's face flushed with anger. "Cross has no authority to stop a legal foreclosure." "Actually, I do." The voice came from behind Boone. Marshal Cross rode up with Deputy Fisher and 3 other men. Clara recognized as witnesses from the families Boone had defrauded. Cross was armed, his badge prominent on his vest. "Marshal," Boone's tone dripped false courtesy. "This is a local matter, bank business." "It's federal business now." Cross dismounted, his hand resting on his gun. "I've spent the night reviewing evidence of systematic fraud. Witness testimony from 5 families, financial records showing a pattern of manipulation, documentation of illegal fee structures. Garrett Boone, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy." "You can't do that." Boone took a step back. "I have powerful friends, the territorial judge. Judge Morrison is also under investigation. Seems he's been taking payments to look the other way." Cross nodded to Fisher. "Deputy, place him in custody." Boone's men shifted nervously. Fisher moved forward with handcuffs. That's when everything went wrong. Boone drew a pistol from inside his coat. "Nobody's arresting me. Nobody's taking what's mine." He aimed at Cross, but Jack was already moving. He burst from the house, crossing the distance with shocking speed. The gunshot cracked loud in the morning air. Jack slammed into Boone, driving him to the ground. The bullet went wild, kicking up dirt. Boone's men drew their weapons. Cross and his men responded. Suddenly the yard was chaos. Clara raised her rifle to her shoulder. sighting down the barrel the way Jack had taught her. The world slowed. She saw Boone's men scattering for cover, saw Cross and his men returning fire, saw her father moving with the fluid precision of a man who'd done this before. Jack wrestled with Boone in the dirt, both men fighting for the pistol. Clara couldn't get a clean shot without risking Jack. She shifted her aim to one of Boone's men taking position behind a water trough, fired. The recoil kicked her shoulder. The man yelped and dropped, clutching his leg. Not a kill shot. She'd aimed low deliberately. Samuel's rifle barked 3 times in quick succession. Disciplined, controlled fire. 2 of Boone's men went down, wounded but alive. The old ranger hadn't lost his touch. Deputy Fisher took cover behind a fence post, shouting at Boone's men, "Stand down, you're firing on federal officers. Drop your weapons." Some of the hired guns hesitated. They'd signed on for intimidation work, not a shootout with the law. 2 dropped their rifles and raised their hands. But the others, either more loyal or more desperate, kept firing. A bullet splintered the doorframe near Clara's head. She ducked back, heart hammering, then repositioned, saw a man aiming at her father. Fired. Missed, breathed. Fired again. This time he staggered back, dropping his rifle. Jack finally wrested the pistol from Boone and threw it aside. He grabbed Boone by his coat, hauled him up, and drove a fist into his face. Boone's head snapped back. Jack hit him again and again, all the rage and frustration of weeks under siege pouring out in those blows. "Jack, stop." Clara's voice cut through the chaos. "You'll kill him." Jack froze, fist raised. Boone sagged in his grip, blood streaming from his broken nose. Jack looked at his hand, at the man he'd nearly beaten to death, and something cleared in his eyes. He shoved Boone away, let him collapse to the ground. "I'm not a murderer," Jack said, his voice ragged. "I won't become one for you." Marshal Cross had reached them, his gun trained on Boone. "Good decision. I need him alive to testify." He gestured to Fisher. "Get him in irons." The fight was draining out of Boone's men. With their employer on the ground and federal law pointing guns at them, resistance seemed pointless. One by one, they dropped their weapons. Cross's men moved to secure them. Clara emerged from the house, rifle still in hand. She scanned the yard. 5 of Boone's men wounded, none critically. Samuel had a graze across his shoulder, but was already binding it with a kerchief. Deputy Fisher was unharmed. Of Cross's group, 1 man had taken a bullet in the arm, but was standing. It could have been so much worse. Jack stood apart from the others, his hands still clenched into fists. Clara went to him, touched his arm gently. He flinched, then seemed to recognize her. The violence drained from his posture, leaving him looking exhausted. "You stopped," Clara said softly. "When I asked, you stopped." "I heard you." Jack's voice was rough. "I was losing myself, becoming what they all think I am. But I heard you, and I stopped." Clara took his hand, uncurled his fingers, laced them with hers. "You're not what they think. You're better. You proved it today." Marshal Cross approached, holstering his weapon. "That was brave, Miss Dawson, and foolish. You could have been killed. So could my father. So could Jack." Clara met his eyes steadily. "This is my home. I wasn't going to hide while others fought for it." Cross nodded with something like respect. "Fair enough. Mr. Reddington, I'm grateful for the intervention. Boone would have shot me if you hadn't acted." Jack just nodded, still processing what had happened. Samuel joined them, his shoulder bound. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine, Papa." Clara hugged him carefully, mindful of his wound. "You were amazing, like you never stopped being a ranger." Samuel smiled wearily. "Some things you don't forget, though I could have done without the reminder that I'm not 25 anymore." Fisher was loading Boone and his men into a wagon, confiscating weapons. Boone glared at them with impotent rage, his face swelling where Jack had hit him. "This isn't over," he spat. I have lawyers, connections. You have a prison sentence waiting, Cross replied calmly. I'd estimate 20 years minimum, more if we uncover additional victims. As Fisher's wagon rolled away with Boone and his men, the witnesses who'd come with Marshal Cross approached the house. Marcus Webb, the homesteader Jack had saved in Denver, was among them. He was a thin man in his 40s, weathered by hard work and harder times. Mr. Reddington, Webb extended his hand. I heard you were here, heard what was happening. Figured it was time I returned the favor you did me 5 years ago. Jack shook his hand, clearly moved. You didn't have to come all this way. The hell I didn't. You saved my life. Least I could do was tell the truth about what happened that night. Webb glanced at Clara. Boone's been spreading lies about you for years. Called you a murderer, but I was there. I saw his brother and his gang beating me bloody. Would have killed me if you hadn't stepped in. You're a hero in my book. The other witnesses echoed similar sentiments. The families Boone had defrauded thanked Jack, Clara, and Samuel for being willing to stand against him. Martha arrived with food and medical supplies, fussing over Samuel's shoulder and the minor cuts and bruises others had sustained. Marshal Cross spent the next 2 hours taking detailed statements from everyone. He examined the ranch's loan documents, compared them to Martha's late husband's records, and interviewed each victim of Boone's schemes. The evidence was overwhelming. I'll be filing charges with the federal prosecutor in Austin, Cross said, gathering his papers. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, attempted murder of a federal officer, resisting arrest. Boone will spend the rest of his life in prison, and Judge Morrison will be removed from the bench pending investigation of his corruption. What about the ranch? Clara asked. The foreclosure, null and void. The loan was based on fraudulent practices, which makes the entire contract invalid. You'll need to refinance with a legitimate lender, but the property remains yours. Cross tipped his hat. You folks did good work here. Took courage to stand against a man like Boone. The territory's better off without him. After Cross and the witnesses departed, an exhausted silence fell over the ranch. Clara, Jack, and Samuel sat on the porch, watching the afternoon sun paint the land in shades of gold. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd stood their ground and won. I can't quite believe it's over, Clara said. It's not over yet. Samuel stood wincing at his shoulder. We still need to rebuild. Find a new lender, catch up on bills, repair what Boone's greed damaged. But at least now we have the chance. He went inside, leaving Jack and Clara alone. Jack stared at his hands, still marked with Boone's blood. I almost killed him, if you hadn't stopped me. But I did stop you, and you listened. Clara took his hand. That's what matters. You had every reason to lose control, and you chose not to. That's not weakness, Jack. That's strength. I was so angry. All these weeks of threats and manipulation and poison, it all came to a head, and I just wanted him to hurt the way he'd hurt us. I know, but you're better than your anger, better than your past. Clara squeezed his hand. You're the man who carves beauty from wood, who sees worth in people others overlook, who stands up for what's right even when it costs him. That's who you are, Jack Reddington. Jack pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I love you, Clara. I should have said it before. Should have told you every day. I love you. I love you too. Clara held him tight, feeling his heartbeat against hers. I have for weeks. Maybe since that first day in the storm, when you looked at me and really saw me. They sat together as the sun descended, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd fought for their future and won. The ranch stretched around them, secure now, a legacy preserved. But more than that, they'd built something new, a partnership forged in fire, tested by adversity and proven strong. Town opinion would take time to change. The Wagner sisters would still whisper, and some would always see Clara as the desperate rancher's daughter, and Jack as the dangerous killer. But their opinions no longer had power. Clara had learned what her mother tried to teach her, That worth wasn't determined by others' judgments. That love could be found in unexpected places. That courage meant standing firm, even when the world told you to give up. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel called them in for supper. 3 months passed like water, flowing over stones, steady and transforming. Autumn arrived in Texas, with cooler nights and the first hints of gold in the trees. The Dawson Ranch thrived under new management. Jack had helped them secure financing from a bank in Austin, one with no ties to Boone's corrupt network. The loan terms were fair, the payments manageable. Clara stood in her mother's garden, now fully restored and bursting with late-season vegetables. Jack had helped her build a new fence around it, sturdy cedar posts he'd carved with decorative caps. Flowers bloomed along the borders, the same wild flowers her mother had loved. It felt like bringing something precious back to life. The town had changed, slowly but surely. When Boone's trial made headlines throughout the territory, detailing decades of fraud and corruption, Copper Ridge had been forced to confront its complicity. The whispers about Jack being a murderer faded as the truth about Denver spread. Marcus Webb's testimony, published in the territorial newspaper, painted Jack as a hero who'd saved an innocent man's life. The Wagner sisters still pursed their lips when Clara walked by, but their poison had lost its power. Other women in town, emboldened by Clara's example, began speaking to her again. Small conversations at first, then invitations to quilting circles and church socials. Clara attended some and declined others, no longer desperate for acceptance she didn't need. Martha's General Store had become a gathering place for those who wanted to rebuild Copper Ridge's reputation. She organized a community fund to help families Boone had displaced, collecting donations and tracking down those who'd been forced to leave. 3 families had returned already, their land restored through the federal investigation. Deputy Fisher had been promoted to sheriff after the former sheriff resigned in disgrace for his association with Boone. Fisher was a fair man, and his first act had been to publicly apologize to Jack for the years of suspicion and isolation. Jack had accepted with grace, though Clara knew the wounds of exclusion still ached sometimes. Samuel's shoulder had healed well. He moved a bit stiffer now, reminded of his age, but his spirit had revived. Having his daughter happy and his ranch secure had given him new purpose. He and Jack worked the land together, planning improvements, discussing breeding programs for the horses. They'd become genuine friends, bound by mutual respect and shared love for Clara. Today was special. Clara adjusted the simple gold wedding band on her finger, still marveling at its presence. The inscription inside read, "Seen, known, loved," words Jack had chosen. They'd married 2 weeks ago in a small ceremony on the ranch. Martha had been her witness. Samuel had officiated, and a handful of friends had attended. Nothing fancy but perfect. Jack emerged from the barn, and Clara's heart still fluttered at the sight of him. He'd filled out some in these months of peace, the gauntness of isolation replaced by the health of regular meals and happiness. He smiled when he saw her, the expression transforming his face from stern to tender. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, joining her in the garden. "Checking on your mother's roses. They're doing well, should have a good bloom next spring." Clara leaned into him as he wrapped an arm around her waist. "I was thinking about her, wishing she could have met you. I wish that too, though I like to think she'd approve. She would have loved you, would have seen what I see. A good man with a kind heart." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Horses moved lazily in the pasture. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimney where Samuel was cooking supper. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked quietly. "Choosing me? The fight with Boone could have cost you everything." Clara turned to face him, cupping his scarred face in her hands. "I regret nothing. You gave me something I'd stopped believing I could have. You saw me, Jack. Really saw me. Not the weight or the whispers or the judgment. You saw Clara, the woman, and you decided she was worth loving. You made it easy." Jack kissed her forehead. "You're the strongest person I know. braver than any soldier I served with. You stood up for what was right even when everyone told you to give up. You saved me as much as I saved you. Then we saved each other." They walked back to the house hand in hand as twilight deepened. Inside, Samuel had set the table for 3. Simple fare, pot roast, and vegetables, biscuits from Clara's mother's recipe. They ate together, this family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and love, and shared struggle. After supper, Clara and Jack sat on the porch while Samuel retired to his study. The night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Jack had brought his carving tools and a piece of cedar, his hands moving with practiced skill as he shaped it into something beautiful. Clara watched him work, content in the quiet. This was her life now, not the one she'd imagined as a girl, but something better, something real and hard-won and precious. She'd learned that worth came from within, that love found its own path, and that courage meant standing firm in who you were regardless of what others believed. "What are you making?" she asked. Jack held up the half-formed carving, a woman and a man on horseback, riding side by side, together, the way it should be. Clara smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "The way it is." They sat together under the Texas stars, 2 souls who'd found each other in the wilderness of judgment and pain, and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The ranch stretched around them, secure and thriving. The future waited, uncertain but promising, and in this moment, watching her husband create beauty with his scarred hands, Clara knew she was exactly where she belonged, home. 3 months passed like water flowing over stones, steady and transforming. Autumn arrived in Texas with cooler nights and the first hints of gold in the trees. The Dawson Ranch thrived under new management. Jack had helped them secure financing from a bank in Austin, one with no ties to Boone's corrupt network. The loan terms were fair, the payments manageable. Clara stood in her mother's garden, now fully restored and bursting with late-season vegetables. Jack had helped her build a new fence around it, sturdy cedar posts he'd carved with decorative caps. Flowers bloomed along the borders, the same wildflowers her mother had loved. It felt like bringing something precious back to life. The town had changed, slowly but surely, when Boone's trial made headlines throughout the territory, detailing decades of fraud and corruption. Copper Ridge had been forced to confront its complicity. The whispers about Jack being a murderer faded as the truth about Denver spread. Marcus Webb's testimony, published in the territorial newspaper, painted Jack as a hero who'd saved an innocent man's life. The Wardner sisters still pursed their lips when Clara walked by, but their poison had lost its power. Other women in town, emboldened by Clara's example, began speaking to her again. Small conversations at first, then invitations to quilting circles and church socials. Clara attended some and declined others, no longer desperate for acceptance she didn't need. Martha's General Store had become a gathering place for those who wanted to rebuild Copper Ridge's reputation. She organized a community fund to help families Boone had displaced, collecting donations and tracking down those who'd been forced to leave. 3 families had returned already, their land restored through the federal investigation. Deputy Fisher had been promoted to sheriff after the former sheriff resigned in disgrace for his association with Boone. Fisher was a fair man, and his first act had been to publicly apologize to Jack for the years of suspicion and isolation. Jack had accepted with grace, though Clara knew the wounds of exclusion still ached sometimes. Samuel's shoulder had healed well. He moved a bit stiffer now, reminded of his age, but his spirit had revived. Having his daughter happy and his ranch secure had given him new purpose. He and Jack worked the land together, planning improvements, discussing breeding programs for the horses. They'd become genuine friends, bound by mutual respect and shared love for Clara. Today was special. Clara adjusted the simple gold wedding band on her finger, still marveling at its presence. The inscription inside read, "Seen, known, loved." Words Jack had chosen. They'd married 2 weeks ago in a small ceremony on the ranch. Martha had been her witness. Samuel had officiated, and a handful of friends had attended. Nothing fancy but perfect. Jack emerged from the barn, and Clara's heart still fluttered at the sight of him. He'd filled out some in these months of peace. The gauntness of isolation replaced by the health of regular meals and happiness. He smiled when he saw her, the expression transforming his face from stern to tender. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, joining her in the garden. "Checking on your mother's roses. They're doing well. Should have a good bloom next spring." Clara leaned into him as he wrapped an arm around her waist. "I was thinking about her, wishing she could have met you. I wish that too, though I like to think she'd approve. She would have loved you, would have seen what I see. A good man with a kind heart." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Horses moved lazily in the pasture. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimney where Samuel was cooking supper. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked quietly. "Choosing me? The fight with Boone could have cost you everything." Clara turned to face him, cupping his scarred face in her hands. "I regret nothing. You gave me something I'd stopped believing I could have. You saw me, Jack. Really saw me. Not the weight or the whispers or the judgment. You saw Clara, the woman, and you decided she was worth loving. You made it easy." Jack kissed her forehead. "You're the strongest person I know, braver than any soldier I served with. You stood up for what was right, even when everyone told you to give up. You saved me as much as I saved you. Then we saved each other." They walked back to the house hand in hand as twilight deepened. Inside, Samuel had set the table for 3. Simple fare, pot roast and vegetables, biscuits from Clara's mother's recipe. They ate together, this family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and love and shared struggle. After supper, Clara and Jack sat on the porch while Samuel retired to his study. The night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Jack had brought his carving tools and a piece of cedar, his hands moving with practiced skill as he shaped it into something beautiful. Clara watched him work, content in the quiet. This was her life now, not the one she'd imagined as a girl, but something better, something real and hard-won and precious. She'd learned that worth came from within, that love found its own path, and that courage meant standing firm in who you were regardless of what others believed. "What are you making?" she asked. Jack held up the half-formed carving, a woman and a man on horseback, riding side by side. "Us, together, the way it should be." Clara smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "The way it is." They sat together under the Texas stars, 2 souls who'd found each other in the wilderness of judgment and pain, and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The ranch stretched around them, secure and thriving. The future waited, uncertain but promising, and in this moment, watching her husband create beauty with his scarred hands, Clara knew she was exactly where she belonged.